There are moments in your life that seem small at first, almost forgettable. A phone call you didn't answer, a message you never received, a plan that fell apart with no explanation. And yet, what you fail to see in the noise of disappointment is that heaven was shifting things behind the veil. And that missed call you've been thinking about wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't your fault. And it surely wasn't just bad timing. It was God stepping in quietly, decisively, mercifully, protecting you from something your heart would have walked straight into thinking it was a blessing, when in truth, it was a detour disguised as opportunity, a snare cloaked in familiarity, and your Father saw what you couldn't see. He heard the conversations you weren't meant to hear. He discerned the intentions behind smiles that seemed genuine, and he rerouted you not to delay your purpose, but to deliver you from premature pain. And while the enemy wanted you to believe that you failed, that you missed your chance, that you lost something important, God has been trying to whisper to you in the quiet. You didn't lose anything meant for you. I removed what would have delayed your blessing, because divine redirection often looks like rejection, like silence, like plans falling apart without explanation. And it's in those uncomfortable moments where your faith is either buried under confusion or built up by trust that doesn't need an answer to keep going. And right now, whether you realize it or not, you're being set up for something so much better, so much more aligned with your spiritual calling, that the very thing you thought was essential to your next season was only a placeholder, a temporary invitation that would have led you into long-term frustration. And so God allowed that call to be missed, not to punish you, but to preserve you, to give you a chance to pause before stepping into something too shallow for the depth of your destiny. And he knows how disappointed you felt, how many questions still spin in your head. And he isn't angry at your confusion. In fact, he's sitting with it, weaving it into a bigger story. One where every missed moment will eventually lead you back to your highest path. And there is something you need to hear now, more than anything else. Not everything sent to you is meant for you. Not every offer, every relationship, every open door is a blessing from heaven. Some are distractions dressed in urgency. And if you're not anchored in discernment, you'll mistake noise for direction and busyness for purpose. But God's redirection is intentional, sacred, and laced with protection, so deep it'll take months, maybe years, for you to realize just how much danger he spared you from by simply allowing that phone to stay silent, that text to remain unsent, that person to walk away without closure, because sometimes closure is God closing the door himself, without explanation, without your approval. And if you'll let go of needing every why, you'll begin to see the what now he's been preparing for you in secret. Because the next chapter of your life will not be built on desperation, it will be founded on discernment. And he is reteaching you how to recognize the difference, to stop chasing what's not chasing him, to stop answering calls from people who only seek to drain what heaven is trying to restore in you, to stop mourning invitations that would have led you into spiritual exhaustion. And he is lifting your head now, saying, what if the very thing you thought was failure was the greatest protection I've ever given you? And the answer will come in waves. You'll see how what didn't work out left room for what will. You'll see how your no made space for heaven's yes. And though it hurts to be misunderstood, overlooked, or ghosted, Jesus is reminding you that even he was rejected so that divine purpose could unfold. And if the Son of God had doors closed in his face, so will you, But don't let a closed door convince you your calling's canceled. No, it's being recalibrated. And that missed call, that moment you couldn't explain, that opportunity you lost, it wasn't the end. It was the beginning of you stepping into something cleaner, clearer, more peaceful, because God isn't just interested in getting you there. He wants you to arrive whole, not limping from avoidable wounds, not bleeding from misalignments you called fate. And he's shifting things now, orchestrating replacements so divinely aligned that when they show up, you won't even remember what you thought you lost. And the call that matters most is not the one you missed. It's the one heaven is about to make to your soul, reminding you that what's for you is on its way, not delayed, just divinely timed, not forgotten, just being fortified in secret. And when it arrives, you'll understand exactly why the first one had to be missed. And now, beloved, as you continue to wonder why things happen the way they did, heaven invites you to look beyond the disappointment and into the deeper pattern of protection that has been forming around you without your awareness. Because every time you were ignored, every time the silence echoed louder than the answers, every time the door you knocked on remained shut despite your hope, a greater hand was guiding the situation away from harm. And just because you didn't understand the no, doesn't mean it wasn't holy, because the truth is, if you had answered that call, if you had stepped into that agreement, if you had pursued what felt familiar instead of what was faithful, your spirit would have been entangled in something that looked like destiny, but was actually a detour. And now the Holy Spirit is revealing to you that there are some calls not made for answering, not because you are undeserving, but because you are too anointed to be delayed by distractions sent to seduce you out of your assignment. And as painful as it was to be left wondering, your unanswered questions were actually heaven's answered prayers. For while you were asking for a breakthrough, God knew a breakdown was hiding behind that misconnection. And so he intercepted it with silence, with a closed door, with a schedule that didn't align on purpose, because his love for you is not passive. It is protective, precise, and relentless. And when he sees danger clothed as opportunity, he doesn't hesitate to reroute you, even if you don't yet see the threat, even if your heart aches in the process. And this divine redirection you're in is not punishment. It's preservation, because the version of you that is emerging now is too powerful to be tied to the things that once tempted you to settle. And even though it might look like you missed your moment, what you actually missed was manipulation. What you missed was emotional enslavement, spiritual compromise, and a season of chasing crumbs. When God was preparing you to feast, and he is still speaking now, saying, "My child, if only you knew what I just saved you from." And though you may never fully understand the details, the peace that's beginning to return is your confirmation that the rejection was indeed redirection, and the ache in your spirit wasn't because something good got away, but because your soul was detoxing from something that would have drained your destiny. And heaven wants you to know that you are not crazy for still thinking about that moment, for replaying that missed message, for wondering what could have been. But God is declaring today that what will be is so much greater that you won't even need closure. You'll just need vision. And that vision is beginning to sharpen now, like a fog lifting after days of spiritual rain. And you're starting to see the outlines of a new path forming. A path paved not by convenience, but by covenant. Not by charm, but by character. Not by what begged for your attention, but by what heaven has been quietly preparing in the background. Because what's coming next will not require you to chase, to beg, to convince, or to shrink. It will meet you where you are and confirm everything you've cried over, everything you surrendered, everything you thought was a mistake, because God doesn't waste anything, not even a missed call, not even your tears of confusion, not even the silence that followed the goodbye that never came. And in this new chapter, you are not walking in circles. You're walking in circles of protection, in cycles of spiritual refinement. And though the enemy tried to plant seeds of doubt in that delay, your faith is being resurrected right now. Not because of what you see, but because of what you're sensing. A quiet nudge, a divine whisper, a holy assurance that something better is forming, something pure is approaching, something aligned is being dispatched in your direction. And you may have thought that you needed that person, that opportunity, that timing, but God says you only need me. And if you trust me, even with your confusion, I will lead you into a season where divine appointments flow so effortlessly. You will look back at every missed call and praise me for what I blocked, for what I canceled, for what I never allowed to connect. And it's starting now. The spiritual acceleration, the unseen preparation, the inner healing that no one knows you need but God. And He is saying to your soul, breathe again, rest. Again, dream again, because what's ahead of you will feel so guided, so confirming, so holy, that you will realize none of it could have been yours if you had picked up what I asked you to leave behind. And that is why the call was missed. That is why you were delayed. That is why your schedule didn't align. And instead of punishing yourself, it's time to prepare yourself. For what's coming next doesn't need to be chased. It's already chasing you with blessings that were tailor-made for you. Obedience, peace that surpasses the timeline you thought you had to meet, and doors that will open at your arrival without a knock, without a call, because they were divinely assigned to respond to your anointing and not your anxiety. And this is the holy redirection of the Lord. Now, listen closely, because what you're about to understand will shift something permanent inside your soul. The reason you keep replaying that missed call, that failed opportunity, that sudden silence, is not because it held your future, but because your spirit recognized that something spiritual happened in that exact moment, and your heart still hasn't caught up to what heaven intercepted. Because there are events in your life that look like accidents, but are actually altar moments, places where God stepped in to interrupt the plans the enemy tried to wrap in urgency and affection. Places where the divine overrode the illusion, where what was dressed in familiarity was exposed before it could enter your future, and the call you didn't answer wasn't just missed on earth. It was declined in heaven on your behalf, not to shame you, not to set you back, but to save you from a version of life too small for the fire that God has placed inside you. And Archangel Michael himself has been sent to guard the gateways of your destiny, shielding you from attachments that look harmless but are spiritually engineered to dull your discernment, to keep you walking in loops instead of forward into divine territory. And while your emotions wrestled with the silence, while your mind fought to find closure in unanswered what-ifs, God has already completed the full orchestration of your next steps. And He needs you to stop mourning the version of life that required you to settle, to chase, to explain your worth, and to shrink into someone easy to manipulate. He is calling you into alignment so holy, so exact, that it requires complete separation from anything that didn't value your gift, your time, or your heart. And it hurts, yes, because the human in you wanted clarity, wanted conversation, wanted closure. But the spiritual realm often doesn't offer those luxuries when your destiny is on the line. And so heaven instead rerouted you quietly, powerfully away from the snare and into preparation. And while you were overthinking the silence, angels were rearranging the path ahead, undoing entanglements that would have made you spiritually sick and replacing them with divine appointments that will feel like rest, not wrestling, like ease, not effort. And the healing is beginning now. Not when you get your apology, not when the person finally admits what they did, not when the opportunity comes back around, but now, in this moment of holy realization that what left wasn't. Yours, what closed wasn't punishment, and what felt delayed was actually God being on time in ways you couldn't yet perceive. And if you could only see what he sees, if you could glimpse the spiritual traps he dismantled while you were sleeping, while you were praying, while you were questioning your worth, you would fall to your knees not in disappointment, but in gratitude, because you almost walked into something that would have convinced you to abandon your assignment. And now heaven is realigning your heart with the truth. That favor delayed is not favor denied. That what's for you is not fragile. And that missed moments are often mercies in disguise. And you've been given another chance now to stop calling what protected you a failure, to stop labeling your delay as divine disapproval, to start seeing that the strength you're building through this silence is not empty. It's equipping you for a future that would crush the version of you who still needed others to validate. They're leaving, and you are entering a chapter now where what is meant for you will come with peace, with confirmation, and without the chaos you once called love. And the most dangerous thing you could do in this hour is try to go back and answer a call heaven already disconnected. So God is urging you now. Don't text them again. Don't revisit that door. Don't pick up what I told you to release, because what's ahead of you is pure, clearer, and infused with promises that cannot be fulfilled, while your hands are still holding old disappointment. And the reason you haven't seen the next move yet is because God is still detoxing your spirit from the residue of what he removed. And once that healing takes root, once you stop expecting closure and start embracing alignment, doors will open so suddenly, connections will appear so effortlessly that you'll realize you never missed anything. You're being positioned, protected, and promoted through divine redirection. And soon you'll look back at this version of yourself, the one mourning the missed call, the unanswered message, the delayed moment, and you'll whisper, "Thank you, God, for what you didn't let happen," because the blessing was never in the answer. It was in the redirection. And now that the silence has stretched long enough for you to see past your assumptions, now that your spirit has survived what your heart thought would break it, you are ready to hear the deeper truth. That call you missed, that number that didn't ring again, that conversation you never got to finish, was never meant to carry you forward. And heaven in all its mercy disguised your breakthrough as a misconnection, because it knew that had you answered in that moment, your soul would have been entangled in a web you couldn't untangle yourself from later. And you would have called it timing, but God would have called it tragedy. And what you thought was rejection was actually divine prevention. And you have no idea how many times angels stood between you and an invisible trap, how many spiritual attacks were planned around your vulnerability, how often the enemy whispered into hearts around you, trying to weaponize your loyalty. But what the enemy didn't realize is that God marked you. Long before you felt lost, long before you felt left behind, Long before you started measuring your worth by the weight of unanswered texts and missed invitations, He had already sealed your life with a divine fingerprint no scheme could erase. And now your tears, your questions, your nights of feeling discarded are being transformed into power because you have entered a realm of revelation, a territory where you no longer mourn who didn't show up. You celebrate what didn't show up to destroy you. And this is where the restoration begins, not in their apology, but in your awakening, because your obedience in this wilderness of waiting has triggered a spiritual response you can't see yet. Heaven is building rooms you didn't even pray for, with opportunities too big to explain and favor too tailored to be earned. And while others tried to limit you to the last moment they could define, God is redefining you in the invisible, reshaping your name in rooms of favor, echoing your spirit. In the conversations of strangers who will open doors for you without knowing why. And it will all trace back to the moment you thought you were forgotten, when really you were being forged into someone unshakable, unexplainable, undeniably anointed. And yes, they may still be watching your silence, still wondering why you didn't chase them, still whispering your name with confusion because they thought you were weak when you stopped responding. But what they didn't know is that God was teaching you the strength of sacred silence, the power of letting heaven answer battles you no longer speak on. And now the reward is coming, not just in restoration, but in vindication, because what you surrendered is being resurrected without residue, without compromise, without the emotional exhaustion that came from proving your worth to people too blind to see the oil you carried. And you will no longer have to explain your journey, because the fruit that is about to burst forth from your life will speak louder than the misunderstandings, louder than the missed opportunities, louder than the people who ghosted you when you needed clarity. And it won't just be compensation. It will be confirmation, and it will come wrapped in divine acceleration, in supernatural timing, in blessings that show up out of nowhere with your name written in heaven's ink. And you will know that none of this could have happened if that call had gone through, if that door had opened, if that yes had come from the wrong place. And that is why God is saying to you now, prepare yourself, because the redirection is almost complete. The waiting season is shifting. The silence has done its work, and the next door will not just open. It will pull you through with divine force. And behind it will be everything you thought you had to chase, now chasing you, because you finally trusted the silence long enough to grow. And heaven is rewarding you with peace that makes sense even without closure, provision that comes without compromise, and presence that doesn't drain you but multiplies you. And there will be no doubt when it arrives. You will feel it in your chest, in your spirit, in the wind around you shifting, and in that moment, you'll hear the echo of God's whisper saying, "This is why I didn't let you answer. This is why I made you wait. This is why I removed what looked like favor but wasn't your future. Because this divine peace, this alignment, this overflowing joy is what I had planned for you all along. And when you receive it, your only task will be to testify, to speak with boldness the story that began with silence and ended in supernatural blessing. Because someone else still stuck in confusion is waiting on your miracle to prove theirs is possible too. And that's why the testimony will be bigger than your pain. It will be the key someone else needs to trust the silence there, sitting in now. And your story will unlock theirs, because heaven wastes nothing, especially not a missed call.